The little girl had been without water for 3 days when she decided to run. Not because she was brave. She wasn't. She was 10 years old, 47 pounds, and so dehydrated her lips had cracked open in 4 places. She ran because the alternative was lying down in her bedroom and never getting up again. And some part of her, some small, stubborn, unbroken part, refused to let that happen inside that house. What she didn't know, crawling through the desert at noon under a sky that felt like the inside of a furnace, was that a man was coming down Highway 9 at 100 miles an hour. A man with 15 years of guilt sewn into his skin and a heart everyone assumed had already died. She almost didn't survive long enough to meet him. He almost didn't stop. If this story already has its hooks in you, and it will, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next in this universe. Drop a like on this video and tell me in the comments, what city, what country are you watching from right now? I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The heat that summer was the kind of heat that changed people. Meteorologists called it an El Niño pattern. Locals called it the worst summer in 40 years. Old men who had lived through droughts before said this one felt different, meaner, somehow, more personal, as if the sky itself had decided to make a point. By the second week of July, the town of Caldera, New Mexico, had already lost 3 dogs, 1 elderly man, and approximately 40% of its remaining groundwater reserves to the unrelenting pressure of a sun that refused to set before it had taken something from everyone. The town itself sat in a shallow bowl between 2 ridges of red rock, the kind of geological formation that had probably looked beautiful to the first settlers and had since become a slow cooker. Main Street had 9 businesses left out of the 23 that had operated 5 years ago. The diner was still open, the hardware store, the library, which survived on stubbornness alone, and the iron will of a 73-year-old woman named Evelyn Brooks, who had outlasted 4 town councils and 1 catastrophic flood and was not about to let a heat wave close her down. The Harpers lived on the good side of Caldera, which was to say the side with the trees, a white house with green shutters, a porch swing that moved in the evening breeze. David Harper coached Little League and organized the food drive every November. Carol Harper ran the women's auxiliary and made the best lemon bars anyone in town had ever tasted, and she brought them to every funeral, every recovery meeting, every school function without being asked. Everyone agreed the Harpers were exactly the kind of people a dying town needed. No one ever looked too hard at the upstairs window, the one with the curtain that never moved. Mia Harper learned to count her swallows before she could count to 100. She had been doing it for as long as she could actually remember, which was not the beginning of her life, she understood, but only the beginning of the part of her life where the rules started. The rules were simple and they were absolute. You ate what was put in front of you. You said thank you. You did not raise your voice. You did not cry loudly. And you did not, under any circumstances, go to the kitchen at night. The locked cabinet beneath the kitchen sink held 3 one-gallon jugs of water. Mia had seen them twice, once through a crack in the cabinet door when she was 7, and once when her father had opened it to refill the small cup he left outside her bedroom door each morning. 8 ounces, 1 cup. Her daily allotment, handed through the door each morning like a prescription. She had asked her mother once why the water was locked. Her mother had looked at her with an expression of such patient, loving sadness that Mia had immediately felt ashamed for asking. "You waste it," Carol had said softly. "You don't know how to be careful with what you have. When you learn to be grateful, we'll talk about more." Mia was 10 years old, and she had been trying to be grateful for years, and she still had not figured out exactly what that was supposed to look like. On the morning she decided to run, she had been without her daily cup for 3 days. She didn't know why it had stopped. Her parents were home. She could hear them moving through the house, hear the television, smell food cooking, hear the sound of ice cracking into glasses in the kitchen. She had knocked on her door on the first evening, on the second. On the morning of the 3rd day, she had put her mouth against the carpet where the gap beneath the door let in a faint breath of cooler air, and she had breathed and tried not to think about water, which was impossible because that is the only thing a body thinks about when it is dying of thirst. Her notebook was on the bed beside her. It was a composition notebook, the black and white marbled kind, and it was filled cover to cover with drawings. Mia drew because it was the one thing she could do that didn't require permission. She drew the house as she imagined it from the outside, which was the only way she ever saw it, through windows. She drew the desert she had only ever glimpsed from the car on the rare trips her parents took her on. She drew highways and open space, and in the last 12 pages, she had drawn a series of images she didn't fully understand yet. Tunnels beneath the floor, pipes running through walls, a room underground with a door on the ceiling. She had drawn those from memory. A memory she couldn't quite locate, some flash of a thing she might have seen when she was very small, before the rules started. She drew them because they felt true in a way she couldn't explain. On the morning of the third day, Mia put on the clothes she had been rationing the use of to preserve what little moisture remained in her skin. Lightweight, loose, a faded yellow t-shirt and shorts. And she filled her cracked water bottle with the last half-inch of water that had been sitting in it for 2 days, and she put her notebook in her worn backpack and she opened her bedroom window. The drop to the ground was 8 feet. She had measured it with her eyes 1,000 times. She had never once let herself measure it seriously until right now. The desert received her without ceremony. One moment she was inside the only life she had ever known, and the next moment she was standing in soil that was the temperature of a baking sheet, and the sun was hitting her like a physical thing, a pressure against the top of her skull, and the town of Caldera was behind her, and the highway was somewhere ahead of her, and she didn't know exactly how far, but she started walking because walking was the only thing she could think of that wasn't staying. She drank the last of the water at the 2-hour mark, which she measured by the sun's position because she had learned to read time that way in the absence of a clock in her room. She calculated, in the methodical way children develop when survival depends on calculation, that this meant it was approximately 10 in the morning, which meant the worst of the heat was still several hours away. She did not make it to the worst of the heat. She made it to a highway marker, Route 9, mile marker 47, and she sat down against it because her legs had simply stopped carrying her, just like that, the way a machine stops when the power is cut. Not gradually, all at once. Her vision was doing something strange around the edges, going white and then dark, and then white again in pulses, and her mouth tasted like pennies, and the ground against her legs was so hot it should have hurt, but she couldn't feel it anymore, which was, she understood, somewhere underneath the whiteness, not a good sign. She put her backpack under her head. She looked up at the sky. It was very blue. She had not known how blue it was before because she had mostly seen it through glass. She thought, at least I got to see it properly once. Then the whiteness swallowed everything. Ryder Cole had not planned to be on Highway 9 that morning. He had planned, insofar as Ryder planned anything anymore, which was not very far, to stay in Tucson for another 2 days, settle a debt he owed an old road brother named Cass, and ride north before the afternoon heat made the asphalt dangerous. But Cass had called at 6 in the morning to say the meeting was off, and Ryder had nothing in Tucson that held him except an almost empty motel room and a coffee that had gone cold, and so he had thrown his gear on his 2009 Harley-Davidson Road King, matte black, no chrome, every decorative piece removed over the years until what remained was just function and forward motion. And he had pointed the machine toward the highway and opened the throttle. He was 41 years old, and he had been riding since he was 19, and he had put somewhere north of 300,000 miles under him in that time, and the road had never felt like escape to him. Not exactly. It felt more like accountability. Moving forward at speed meant he couldn't stay still long enough to drown in the particular kind of silence that waited for him whenever he stopped moving. 15 years was a long time to carry a thing. Long enough that it had stopped feeling like carrying and started feeling like structure. Like the guilt and the grief had reorganized themselves into the actual architecture of who he was. And removing them would not leave him lighter, it would leave him hollow. His younger brother Danny had been 24 years old, and it had been in August, very much like this one, and Ryder had been 3 hours away when the call came, and 3 hours was exactly 3 hours too far. And he had known, when he heard the particular silence on the other end of the line before the words started, exactly what kind of news was coming. He didn't like to think about August. He was thinking about it when he came over the slight rise in the highway at mile marker 46 and the heat shimmer on the asphalt resolved as he closed the distance at 90 miles an hour into a shape that was too small to be an adult and too still to be anyone who had put themselves there on purpose. He almost passed it. There was a part of Ryder Cole that had, over the last 15 years, become very good at not stopping, at keeping the throttle open, keeping the wind in his face, keeping forward motion as the answer to everything. He had built an entire philosophy of existence around the idea that pausing created the conditions for pain, and pain was the one thing he had already exceeded his lifetime quota of. He passed the shape. He got 20 feet past it. Then he hit the brakes. The Road King fishtailed slightly on the hot asphalt before he controlled it, and he was already off the bike and moving back down the highway before it had fully stopped rocking, his boots loud on the baked ground. Up close, the shape resolved into something that hit him with the force of a physical blow. A child. A little girl. 40-something pounds and not moving, her body curved around a backpack she'd used as a pillow, her lips cracked and dark at the edges, her skin the waxy, tight look of severe dehydration. Ryder had done 2 tours before the road claimed him. He knew what a body looked like when it was deciding whether to keep going. He dropped to one knee and pressed 2 fingers against her neck and found a pulse that was there but thin and fast, hummingbird quick, working too hard for what it was being asked to sustain. "Hey." His voice came out rougher than he intended. He hadn't spoken to anyone in 2 days, and it showed. "Hey, kid." Nothing. He had water, not much, but a 20-ounce bottle in his right saddlebag, half full, warm from the heat but wet. He opened it with one hand while his other arm slid under her shoulders and tilted her head back slightly, the way you do with someone who's past the point of drinking on their own, and he let water touch her lips. Her tongue moved before her eyes did. It was the most heartbreaking thing he had seen in years, that movement. Purely involuntary, her body reaching for what it needed even when her mind was gone somewhere else. He kept the water coming in small amounts, not too much, waiting between each small pour, watching her throat work. Her eyes opened on the 4th pour. They were gray, which surprised him. He didn't know why it surprised him. She stared up at him with the confused, delayed focus of someone returning from a very long distance, and then something in her expression shifted. Some assessment happened behind those gray eyes, quick and practiced in a way that no 10-year-old's eyes should be practiced, and she tensed. "It's okay," he said, which was a thing he wasn't sure was true, but seemed like the right thing to say. She stared at him, took him in with those exhausted, too old eyes, the tattoos on his forearms, the leather cut he wore even in this heat because he had worn it every day for 11 years and it had become a second skin, the scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw. The size of him, which was considerable, 6'2", 220, the kind of build that had served him very well in rooms that required a physical argument. She didn't run. That registered somewhere in him, significant. Most children, finding themselves horizontal and looked over by someone who looked like Ryder Cole, would have scrambled backward. This one just kept watching him with those measuring eyes and eventually said, in a voice like dry paper, "Is there more water?" Not a question, a calculation. "Yeah," he said, "there's more water." He got her upright slowly, one hand supporting her back, and she sat against the highway marker and drank from the bottle in careful, controlled sips that told him she knew something about rationing that she should not know at her age. She didn't gulp, she didn't choke. She measured each swallow with a precision that made his chest do something uncomfortable. "What's your name?" he said. She thought about this for longer than her name should have required. "Mia," she finally said. "Mia what?" Another pause. "Just Mia right now." He looked down the highway in both directions. Empty. Nothing in the distance but heat shimmer and red rock and the kind of silence that lived in the desert, like a resident. He looked back at the girl, who was watching the horizon with the expression of someone calculating whether the thing she'd run from was visible yet. "How long have you been out here?" he said. "Since morning." "How long without water before that?" The pause this time was different, heavier. 3 days, she said. The way she said it was flat, reported, the way you report a fact about the weather. Like it was a thing that simply was, not a thing that shouldn't be. 3 days, in July, in New Mexico. Ryder sat back on his heels and looked at her, and something moved through him that he didn't have a clean name for. Not pity. He'd learned pity was useless, and she didn't want it. He could already see that. Something older than pity. Something that lived in the part of him that still got out of bed in the morning without a good reason. "Who did that?" he said. She looked at him for a long time. "Nobody," she said. "It was an accident." She was lying. He knew she was lying, and she knew he knew she was lying, and neither of them said anything about it. and in the silence between them the desert breathed its hot, indifferent breath, and somewhere in the distance a hawk drew a slow circle in the white sky. He made a decision. He wasn't sure when exactly he made it. Maybe when he felt her pulse. Maybe when he watched her ration the water. Maybe when she said just Mia right now, with the particular tone of a person who had learned that her name could be used against her. "There's a place about 12 miles north," he said. "Off the highway. Used to be a biker shelter. It's got shade. It's got water. It's got—" He paused. "It's quiet." She looked at the highway. She looked at him. She looked at his motorcycle, and he watched her process it. The machine, the implication of it, what it meant about him. "You don't have to," he said. "I can call someone." Something moved through her expression at that, quick and frightened. "No," she said. "Don't call anyone." "Mia, please." The please came out stripped of everything, just the word in its raw form, no performance around it, and that stripped-down version of it was somehow worse than tears would have been. "Please don't call anyone yet." Ryder looked at her for another moment, at the backpack clutched against her chest, at the cracked water bottle, at the notebook corner peeking out of the zipper, at the marks on her wrists that he had noticed when he tilted her head back to give her water, and had not mentioned and was not going to mention until she was safe and hydrated and somewhere with shade. "Okay," he said. "Not yet." He got the Road King off the asphalt, and she climbed on behind him without being asked, without hesitation, wrapping her arms around his waist, with the careful grip of someone who had learned that the things you held tightly were the things you might be allowed to keep. He felt her forehead drop against his back as he started the engine, and the vibration of it moved through both of them, and she made a small sound that was not quite a word. He thought it might have been okay. He pulled onto the highway heading north, and the desert opened up around them, and the heat pressed down, and the Road King's engine was the only sound in the world for 12 miles. She was asleep against his back by mile 4. He didn't speed up, didn't slow down, just held the speed steady, and sometime around mile 8 he did something he had not done voluntarily in 15 years on the highway. He reached back with one hand and held onto her arm so she wouldn't slip. The shelter was called the Ironbound House, which was a name given to it by a chapter of the Desert Iron Brotherhood that had operated out of Caldera in the late 90s before the chapter dissolved and the members scattered to wherever old road brothers scatter. The building itself was a converted equipment depot, concrete block walls, corrugated metal roof, a hand-built addition on the west side that someone had put up with more determination than skill. It sat behind a ridge of rock that kept it invisible from the highway, connected to the road by a dirt track that was easy to miss and impossible to navigate without knowing it was there. Ryder knew it was there because he had slept in it 3 times over the years, in the way that road brothers know the shelters on their routes, the way sailors know the coves, not because they own them, but because the road is a community with its own infrastructure, its own hospitality, its own code of passage. He pulled the Road King under the shade of the metal overhang and killed the engine and sat very still until Mia woke up, which took about 30 seconds. She lifted her head from his back and looked around with the careful, calibrating alertness of someone who had learned that every new place needed to be assessed before they let themselves feel anything about it. He watched her do it and said nothing, because he recognized the assessment process. He had his own version of it, had walked into every room he'd entered for the last 15 years with his hands loose at his sides and his back to no one and his eyes on the exits. "This is it," he said. "It's real," she said, not quite to him, confirming something for herself. Yeah, inside, the shelter was austere in the way that functional spaces get when they're maintained by people who care about purpose rather than comfort. Concrete floor, folding tables, a propane camp stove on a plywood shelf, and in the back room, the thing that had made the Ironbound House worth knowing about for 30 years of desert riders. A water tank, properly sealed, properly maintained, fed by a rooftop collection system that one of the old brothers had engineered with the kind of ingenuity that comes from knowing what it means to run dry. Mia walked through the shelter slowly. She touched the walls. She looked up at the ceiling. She stopped in the doorway of the back room and looked at the water tank. Gray metal, 500 gallons, with a hand pump and a clean hose. She stared at it for a long time. "You can use it," Ryder said from behind her. She turned around and looked at him with an expression that was doing too many things at once for him to read all of them. Then she walked to the pump, worked the handle 4 times with both hands until the water came, and put her face under it. She didn't cry. He had expected her to cry, maybe. She didn't. She just stayed under the water for a long time, pumping and letting it run over her face and her hair and the back of her neck. And when she finally lifted her head, her expression was the kind of thing that Ryder Cole would not find words for later when he tried to describe it to Evelyn Brooks. Because some things that happen on a person's face are not made of words. He put a pot of water on the propane stove for instant coffee because he needed something to do with his hands, and he found a can of soup in the small supply cache and opened it and set it to warm. And he didn't say anything, and she didn't say anything, and the silence between them was different from the silence of the highway. It had room in it, somehow. She dried her face on her t-shirt and climbed onto one of the folding chairs and put her backpack on the table and took out the notebook and held it against her chest with both arms. And that was when he noticed what she'd written on the cover in careful, deliberate letters. MIAs. If found, please do not open. You want soup, he said. Yes, please, she said, automatic, reflexive, the manners of someone who had been trained into politeness as a survival mechanism rather than a social grace. He poured soup into a metal camping bowl and set it in front of her with a spoon, and she ate it the same way she'd drunk the water. Not desperate, not fast, but with a careful, conscious attention, like she was aware of every mouthful in a way that was not about pleasure. How long were you in that house? He said, when the soup was half gone. She looked up from the bowl, thought about whether to answer. My whole life, she said. And the water thing. How long? She put the spoon down. I don't remember it being different, she said. She said it quietly, factually, without performance. She looked at the table. I thought it was normal for a long time. I thought everybody had rules about water. Ryder's coffee cup was in his hands, and he kept it there, kept his grip even, because the alternative was the particular tight-jawed silence that people who didn't know him usually interpreted as anger. And that was, in fact, anger, but the kind that he had spent 2 tours and 15 years learning to manage into something that didn't break things. It's not, he said. I know that now, she said. I figured it out. She paused. I figured a lot of things out. She put her hand on the notebook, not opening it, just touching it. What's in there? He said. The look she gave him was long and complicated and landed somewhere between trust and its opposite. Things I figured out, she said finally. Pictures mostly. Can I? No. Flat. Immediate. Then, softer. Not yet. He nodded. Not yet. The same thing he'd said to her on the highway. He wondered if she'd noticed. Outside, the desert afternoon was building toward the particular violence of a 5 o'clock sun that hit the red rock and bounced back doubled. The temperature inside the shelter was probably 90 degrees with the shade, which was a significant improvement over the 112 outside. Mia finished her soup. She drank 2 more full cups of water slowly. Her color was coming back in increments, returning to her face like something that had been locked away. He was thinking about what to do next, because she couldn't stay here indefinitely, and he couldn't just take her north, and calling the authorities was something she'd asked him not to do, and he didn't yet know enough to know whether honoring that ask was protecting her or failing her, when she spoke. You stopped, she said. What? On the highway. You went past me and then you stopped. She was looking at him steadily. Why did you stop? He turned his coffee cup in his hands. The honest answer was that he didn't fully know. The honest answer was that 20 feet past her, his body had acted before his mind caught up, and by the time his mind arrived at the scene, his hands were already on the brakes. The honest answer involved his brother Danny, and the particular shape a person made when they were on the ground and not moving. Couldn't keep going, he said. She watched his face, processing. People usually do, she said. Keep going. Yeah, he said. I know. Something in the space between them shifted at that. Subtle, like a pressure change. She looked back at her notebook and then back at him. And then she unzipped the backpack slowly and reached in past the notebook and pulled out the cracked plastic water bottle, turned it upside down to show him it was empty. This was all I had, she said. I took it 3 days ago from the bathroom sink when my parents were asleep, before they stopped giving me my cup. She set it on the table between them. I made it last until this morning. An 8-ounce water bottle. 3 days. 112-degree desert. He looked at that empty bottle on the table and thought, she almost made it. Not to safety. She hadn't been heading anywhere specific, he understood that now. She had been heading away, which was a different kind of goal. She had almost made it far enough away that the distance itself would have been the point. "Mia," he said. She looked up. "I'm going to need you to tell me some things," he said. "Not everything. Not right now. But enough for me to figure out how to help you without making it worse." She held his gaze for a long moment. Outside, the wind moved through the rocks, and the shelter creaked slightly, and the distant sound of a hawk carried through the walls from somewhere above. "My parents," she started, and then stopped. Her jaw tightened. Then, "They told everyone they were good people." "I know," Ryder said. He didn't know the Harpers specifically, but he knew the category. He had known it since he was a child himself. "And everyone believed them," she said. There was something in her voice then that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but lived in the territory between them. "Because of the lemon bars and the Little League and—" She stopped again, looked at the table. "Because they're good at being seen." The notebook shifted under her hand like it was something alive. "And nobody ever looked at you," Ryder said quietly. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The shelter settled into its particular late afternoon silence, and the light coming through the single high window went from white to amber, and somewhere in the desert outside the temperature began its reluctant, incremental retreat from the day's peak. Ryder was thinking, running through options, assessing the situation the way he had learned to assess things, looking for the responsible path through terrain he didn't have a map for, when Mia reached into the notebook and pulled something out from between the pages. A drawing. She set it on the table between them, facing him. It was a cross-section, drawn in the careful architectural lines of a child who had spent years with nothing to do but observe and draw. It showed a house. Her house, presumably, recognizable in the way that children's drawings of their own houses always are. But beneath the house, drawn in the same careful lines, was something else. A system of tunnels, pipes, and rooms. A chamber with what appeared to be large tanks. A door in the ceiling connected to what might have been a trapdoor in the floor of the house. He looked at it for a long time. "This is real," he said. Not a question. "I think I saw it when I was little," she said. "Before the rules. I think there's something under the house." She looked at the drawing. Something big. He looked up at her face. She looked back at him with those gray eyes that were too old for her face and too steady for everything she'd been through, and something passed between them that was not a decision yet, but was the shape of one. The outline of a thing taking form in the space between a broken child and a damaged man in a desert shelter with nothing around them but heat and rock and the particular, stubborn, irrational persistence of two people who had decided, for reasons neither of them fully understood yet, to not give up. Outside, the night was coming. And somewhere back in Caldera, a porch swing moved in the evening breeze, and two people who were very good at being seen were noticing, for the first time, that the upstairs curtain was moving. The night came in fast, the way desert nights do. Not gradually, not with any warning, just the sun hitting the ridgeline and the temperature dropping 20 degrees in 40 minutes, like something had been cut loose. One moment, the shelter walls were holding amber light, and the next the shadows were absolute and the cold was real, and Mia Harper was asleep on a folded tarp in the corner with her backpack under her head and her notebook pressed against her chest, and Ryder Cole was sitting outside on a concrete block with a cigarette he hadn't lit yet turning between his fingers. He didn't smoke. Hadn't in 6 years. But he kept a pack in his left saddlebag the way some people kept a photograph. Not to use, just to have, just to hold. He rolled the cigarette between his thumb and index finger and looked at the stars, which were excessive out here, the way they always were in the desert away from the light pollution of towns, and he thought about what to do. The problem was not simple. The problem was a 10-year-old girl sleeping 8 feet away from him who had marks on her wrists consistent with rope or zip ties. He'd seen them clearly in the late afternoon light when she'd reached across the table to show him the drawing, who had been denied water for 3 days in a July heat emergency by people who coached Little League and made lemon bars and were, by every available social account, exactly the kind of people you wanted living next door. The problem was the drawing, the cross-section with the underground room and the pipes and the tanks. The problem was that calling the authorities was the obvious move, and the obvious move had a very particular failure rate with situations like this one. He knew that failure rate. He had watched it play out from the other side of a hospital waiting room when he was 26 years old and his brother Danny was still alive, and the people Ryder had called for help had looked at him, at his cut, at his tattoos, at the particular way a man who has spent time in difficult rooms carries himself, and had made their decision about who to believe before he'd finished his second sentence. He had not been on the right side of official judgment enough times to trust it automatically, but he also could not keep a child in an abandoned desert shelter indefinitely. He was not equipped for this. He was 41 years old, and he had a go bag and a motorcycle, and 11 years of road and a history of people who loved him ending up in situations that required hospitals. He put the unlit cigarette back in the pack. He picked up his phone. The number he dialed rang 4 times before it picked up, and the voice on the other end was rough with sleep and not entirely happy about it. "It's 2 in the morning, Ryder." "I know what time it is, Hatch." A pause. The sound of movement, sheets, someone sitting up. "You in trouble." "Not my trouble." Another pause. Pause, longer this time, recalibrating. Marcus Hatch, road name Hatch, given name Marcus, used almost never, was the closest thing Ryder had to an anchor point in this part of the world. They had ridden together for 11 years across 4 states and 2 serious situations that neither of them discussed with anyone outside the Desert Iron Brotherhood, the remnants of which were scattered across New Mexico and Arizona in a loose, informal network that functioned less like an organization and more like a mutual obligation, the kind that didn't require paperwork because it was written into something older than paper. Hatch was 53 years old and had the disposition of a man who had long since made peace with the fact that the world was going to keep presenting him with problems he hadn't asked for. He ran an auto repair shop in a town called Vega, 40 miles east of Caldera, and he had a German shepherd named Consequence, and a daughter in college, and a scar on his right hand from a situation in 2009 that he and Ryder had agreed never to put words to. "What kind of trouble?" Hatch said. Ryder told him. He kept it short. The highway, the girl, the shelter, the water, the marks. He read the drawing's details from memory. He did not editorialize. When he finished, Hatch was quiet for long enough that Ryder checked the signal on his phone to make sure the call was still connected. "You called anyone else?" Hatch said. "No. Child welfare. She asked me not to." "She's 10, Ryder." "I know how old she is." "Then you know a 10-year-old asking you not to call child welfare is not the same as you having a reason not to call child welfare." "I know that too." He looked at the shelter wall. Through it, in the way you feel presences when the night is quiet enough. "But she said nobody believed her. And I'm looking at marks on her wrists, and I'm looking at a drawing that either means there's something major buried under her parents' property, or she's got an imagination that runs to underground architecture, and I don't think it's the second one." Another long pause. "There's someone you should talk to before you do anything," Hatch said. "In Caldera. Librarian named Evelyn Brooks. Old woman, runs the town library. She—" He stopped. "Just talk to her. Don't call welfare until you've talked to her." "You know her." "The Brotherhood built her library's roof in 2019. She's someone who sees things, okay? Just talk to her first." Ryder looked at the stars. "I need someone here," he said. "Tonight. I can't leave her alone." Hatch was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'll be there in an hour." He came in 55 minutes, riding a 2014 Street Glide that announced itself on the dirt track long before the headlight appeared. Big man, Hatch. Not as tall as Ryder, but built wider, with a gray beard and hands that looked like they'd been reshaped by 30 years of mechanical work. He pulled under the overhang and killed the engine and stood beside his bike for a moment looking at Ryder, the way road brothers look at each other when the situation is serious. A full assessment, measuring what the other man's face was doing. "She's still asleep," he said. "Yeah." Hatch moved his jaw like he was working through something. He looked at the shelter door. "How bad? The marks or the overall situation?" "Both." Ryder told him about the 3 days. Hatch's face did what Ryder's face had done earlier at the table. Went very still in the particular way that large, dangerous men go still when they are managing something that would otherwise break furniture. "Her parents," Hatch said. "Harper. David and Carol Harper." "You know them." Hatch looked at him. "Caldera's 40 miles away, Ryder. Yeah, I know of them. David Harper has been on the County Drought Relief Committee for 3 years. He's one of the people distributing the emergency water allotments to families in the valley. The sentence landed between them and sat there. Ryder heard it, turned it over, let it settle into the drawer in his mind where he kept things that were going to matter later. "Well," he said. "Yeah," said Hatch. They sat outside together until 4 in the morning, talking in the low, clipped way of men who have learned that most of what needs to be said doesn't require volume. Ryder told him about the drawing again. Hatch listened without interrupting, which was how he listened when something mattered. "Underground water reserve," Hatch said when Ryder finished. "That's what it looks like." Caldera was built on an aquifer. There were emergency cisterns dug under some of the older properties in the 50s, drought preparedness, back when people actually prepared for things. Hatch looked at his hands. If the Harper property is sitting on one of those old reserves and someone figured out how to tap it, they'd have water, Ryder said, while the rest of the town dried out. Hatch was quiet. "And the man running the distribution committee," Ryder said, "would know exactly which families were short and how much longer before they asked hard questions." The desert night breathed around them. "We need Evelyn," Hatch said. They slept in shifts. Ryder took first watch and Hatch took the second, and somewhere around 5:30 Mia woke up and found Hatch sitting at the folding table drinking instant coffee from a metal cup, and she stood in the doorway of the back room and looked at him with the full assessment protocol running behind her eyes. Hatch looked back at her. "Coffee's terrible," he said. "You want some?" She processed this. "I'm not allowed coffee." "Okay," he said. "There's also water, and I found a box of crackers in the supply cache that aren't too stale." She came to the table slowly, sat down, accepted crackers, drank water, looked at Hatch the way she'd looked at Ryder, that particular measuring quality, taking inventory. "You're another one," she said. "Another what?" "Biker." Her eyes moved to his cut, which was hanging on the back of his chair. "Like him." "Like him," Hatch agreed. She thought about this. "Are there more of you?" "Some." "Do they all live out here in the desert?" "No, most of us live in towns. We just end up out here sometimes." She looked at the door. "Because of people like me." Hatch set his coffee cup down. He looked at her with an expression that was direct without being aggressive, the kind of eye contact that men like Hatch offer when they want you to know they mean what they're about to say. "Sometimes," he said. "Yeah." Ryder came in from outside at 6 and found them sitting in something that was not quite comfortable silence but was at least a shared space, and he poured the last of the hot water into a cup and stood against the wall and drank it, and looked at Mia and she looked back at him. "We need to go into Caldera," he said. Her face changed. "Not to your house," he said immediately. "There's someone I want to talk to, a librarian. Her name is Evelyn Brooks." Something shifted in Mia's expression. "I know her," she said quietly. She came to the school once, last year. She brought books." A pause. "She looked at me, like she actually—" Another pause. "Like she was actually looking." "Then she's the right person," Hatch said. "My parents will be looking," Mia said. The flat reported quality was back in her voice. "By now they'll know I'm gone." "I know," Ryder said. "And when they find me, they'll—" She stopped. Her hands went to the notebook. "They'll say things about me. They're very good at saying things." "I know that too," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "Do you?" she said, and it wasn't challenging, not exactly. It was genuinely asking whether he understood the specific mechanics of it, the way a credible family with good standing could take a child's truth and dismantle it so completely that the child herself began to doubt she'd experienced it. "My brother," Ryder said, and then stopped, because that was as far as he'd gotten in 15 years at introducing that subject in conversation, and he had no idea where he thought he was going with it. Mia waited. "He tried to tell people things once," Ryder said carefully, like a man walking terrain he knows has mines in it. "Important things, about people who looked good on the outside, and nobody listened because of what he looked like and where he came from." He looked at his coffee cup. "And I wasn't there when it mattered." The shelter was very quiet. "Did he survive?" Mia said. The word survive in her mouth was not a metaphor. She was asking it literally, as someone who had spent the last 3 days assessing her own survival. "No," Ryder said. She nodded, once, like a thing confirmed. "I'm sorry," she said. And she meant it. He could hear that she meant it in the particular way people mean things when they themselves understand loss. Not as an abstract concept, but as a weight they've personally lifted. Hatch looked at his coffee cup. Nobody said anything for a while. On. They rode into Caldera at 8 in the morning, Mia on the back of Ryder's Road King, Hatch running parallel on the street glide. And the town received them the way small towns receive things they weren't expecting, with a kind of slow, communal rotation of attention that started at the gas station and moved outward from there. Caldera on a summer morning was a thing of diminished but stubborn life. The heat was already building, 83 degrees at 8 a.m. and climbing. And the main drag had a particular quality of conservation to it, people moving quickly from shade to shade, the kind of body language that develops when a population has been living under resource pressure for long enough that it rewires the automatic behaviors. There was a water distribution point set up outside the community hall, 3 large tanks on a flatbed, and a line of people with jugs and bottles and buckets that started at the tanks and ran halfway down the block. Ryder looked at the line as they rode past it. He thought about David Harper on the Drought Relief Committee. He thought about the drawing. He kept his face neutral. The library was a single-story adobe building 2 blocks off the main drag with a hand-painted sign and a cactus garden that someone, Evelyn Brooks, presumably, had maintained with fierce competence through conditions that had killed everyone else's plants. It was open at 8, which told him something about the librarian before he met her. He killed the engine outside. Mia stayed on the bike. Hatch pulled alongside and killed his own engine, and the sudden silence after the sound of the 2 machines was the particular silence of a decision about to be made. "Stay here," Ryder said to Mia. She looked at the library door. "I want to come." "In a minute." "Let me—" "She knows me," Mia said. "You said she's someone who sees things." She looked at him directly. "Then she needs to see me, not just hear about me." He held her gaze. She was right, and he knew she was right, and he also wanted to give her the option of not being looked at for 30 more seconds. "Okay," he said. Inside, the library was cooler than outside by perhaps 15 degrees, which in those conditions was the difference between endurance and relief. It smelled like paper and something faintly herbal, and every surface held books with the kind of organized intentionality that spoke of a mind that had spent decades deciding exactly where things belonged. Evelyn Brooks was behind the main desk, and she looked up when they came in, and her expression went through 3 things very quickly: assessment, recognition, not of Ryder or Hatch, but of Mia, clearly, her eyes going to the girl and staying there, and then something that was not quite alarm but was its first cousin. She was 73 years old, and she was the kind of 73 that had been earned rather than simply arrived at. The lines in her face were the lines of someone who had looked at difficult things directly and not looked away. White hair cut short, reading glasses on a chain, a cardigan that had no business existing in July and yet seemed perfectly correct on her. "Mia Harper," she said. Quiet, direct. "Hello, Mrs. Brooks," Mia said. Evelyn came around the desk without hurry and stood in front of the girl and looked at her the way Ryder had described, the actual looking. And what she saw in Mia's face made her close her eyes for exactly 2 seconds and then opened them again. "Sit down," she said to all of them, but mainly to Mia. "All of you." She made them tea on a hot plate behind the desk. Actual tea, not instant anything. And she sat across the table from them in the reading area at the back of the library, and she looked at Ryder with the frank, unhurried assessment of someone who had been evaluating people for 7 decades. "Your brotherhood," she said. "Former chapter," Ryder said. "Independent now." She nodded like that distinction made sense to her. "Marcus called me at 6 this morning," she said. "He told me some of what you told him." "Then you know the basic shape of it." "I know your version of the basic shape of it," she said, not unkindly but precisely. "I'd like Mia to tell me her version." She looked at the girl. Mia was holding her tea with both hands, the notebook flat on the table beside her, and she was looking at Evelyn with an expression that was doing the same thing it had done when she'd looked at Ryder on the highway, running the assessment, measuring the trustworthiness of the offered space. Whatever she found in Evelyn's face satisfied something. She talked for 22 minutes, Ryder knew because he watched the clock above the desk, and he couldn't not track it. The time of it, the length of time, a 10-year-old girl had been waiting to say these things to someone who would actually receive them. She told it in the same flat, reported, precise way she told everything, without performance or self-pity, just the facts of it laid out in the order they occurred. The rules, the cabinet, the cup, the 3 days, the marks. And here she pulled up her sleeves without being asked, just showed them, matter of fact, the faded linear marks that ran across both wrists, and the window, and the highway, and the mile marker, and the water. Evelyn Brooks listened to every word of it and did not once interrupt and did not once look away from the girl's face. When Mia stopped talking, the library was very quiet. "How long have you been documenting things?" Evelyn said, nodding at the notebook. Mia touched it. 2 years? May I? This time, Mia slid it across the table. Evelyn opened it and turned through the pages slowly, and her face was doing a complicated, controlled thing that Ryder was watching because it told him information he couldn't get from anything else. What he saw was not surprise. It was the particular expression of confirmation, of someone seeing evidence of something they had already suspected but not yet been able to prove. She stopped on the cross-section drawing, looked at it for a long time. Then she looked up at Mia. "You drew this from memory?" "Yes." "How old were you when you saw it?" "Maybe 5, Mia said. "Before the rules started. My dad was doing something in the floor and I came in and he—" She stopped, breathed. "He moved me out of the room really fast, but I saw." "And you remembered it?" "I draw things I need to remember," Mia said simply. "It's the only way I can keep them." Evelyn looked at the drawing again. Then she closed the notebook and slid it back to Mia with both hands, carefully, the way you return something that belongs to its owner. She stood up and walked to a filing cabinet against the wall and opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a rolled document. A large one, the kind that required both hands and a clear surface to lay out. She cleared the table with efficient movements and unrolled it and weighted the corners with books, and they all leaned over it. It was a survey map, old. The paper was the yellow-brown of age, and the printing was the kind that predated digital reproduction. Property maps of Caldera Township, dated 1954. And marked on it, in a system of dotted lines that ran beneath the street grids and property lines, were the emergency cisterns, the underground water reserves built under the original Caldera Town Plan by the County Drought Preparedness Committee. There were 6 of them, one under what was now the community hall, one under the old school, which had since been demolished, one under a property on the East Ridge that had changed hands 5 times since 1954 and was now a vacant lot, and one, the largest one, marked with a capacity notation of 50,000 gallons, directly beneath the footprint of what was now, according to the property records in Evelyn's file, the Harper residence. Nobody spoke. Ryder looked at the map. He looked at Mia's drawing. He looked at the map again. 50,000 gallons. In a town that was receiving emergency water allocations because the drought had pushed the municipal supply to critical levels. In a town where a man named David Harper was on the committee deciding who received those allocations and how much. "How long have you known about this?" Ryder said. Evelyn straightened up. "I've known about the cistern since I found this map 4 years ago, doing a historical records project. I've suspected the Harpers were accessing it for about 18 months. She looked at him steadily. "I had no proof. And I have no standing. I'm a librarian." "You didn't tell anyone." "I told the county records office. I filed an inquiry with the water authority." A pause. "David Harper is on the board of the county water authority." Ryder heard the door of the library open behind him. He turned. There were 2 of them, deputies, young, both of them, with the look of men who had been given an assignment. They were not entirely comfortable with, but were going to carry out because that was the job. The one in front, late 20s, buzz cut, a jaw that worked like it was chewing something, looked at Ryder and Hatch with the very particular expression of someone who had been briefed on who they were going to find here before they walked through the door. "Ryder Cole," the one in front said. Ryder said nothing. "We've had a report of a missing child. Mia Harper, age 10. His eyes moved to the girl, who had gone very still at the table. "Her parents contacted us this morning." "She's right here," Ryder said. "She's safe." "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the child." She's fine. She was dehydrated and, sir, the deputy's hand moved to his belt. Not the firearm, the radio. A controlled practice movement designed to establish authority without escalating. Please step away from the child. There are some questions. I want to stay with him. Mia's voice was clear and steady and came from the table behind Ryder. Everyone in the room looked at her. She was sitting up straight, her hands flat on the table beside the notebook, her gray eyes on the deputy. He found me on the highway. He gave me water. I want to stay with him. Honey, your parents are very worried about you. I ran away, she said. Flat, clear. I ran away because they locked the water away. I almost died. The deputy's expression shifted through something that was not quite doubt but was adjacent to it. We're going to need to sort all of that out, he said carefully. But right now, policy requires deputy. Evelyn Brooks's voice, from beside the filing cabinet, had the particular quality of someone who had spent 50 years managing rooms full of people who thought noise was authority. It was not loud. It cut through everything. Before you do anything else, I would like you to look at something. She put her hand on the survey map. She put her other hand on Mia's notebook, still closed, beside it. The deputy looked at both of them. The second deputy, who had not spoken yet, was looking at Mia with an expression that was doing more work than his partner's, reading her the way you read someone when you're trying to figure out what's true underneath what's being said. Ryder watched him, filed it. Whatever you need to sort out, Ryder said to the first deputy, keeping his voice even, keeping everything level and managed, because this was exactly the moment where a man who looked like him needed to be exactly what he was, and not anything else. Sort it out in here, in front of witnesses, with Evelyn present. The deputy looked at Ryder. Ryder looked back. The calculation happening behind the deputy's eyes was visible in the working of his jaw, the slight shift of his weight. He was measuring what Ryder Cole looked like against what Ryder Cole was doing, and the two things were not resolving cleanly into the narrative he'd been handed when he got the call. Fine, he said finally. We'll take statements here. Boab. The statements took 2 hours. Ryder gave his twice. The first time to the deputy with the buzz cut, who listened with the barely concealed skepticism of someone who had already made up his mind and was collecting information to support the conclusion he'd arrived at before he walked in the door. The second time to the second deputy, older than he'd initially read, Ryder realized, maybe 35, with the careful eyes of someone who'd been doing this long enough to have learned to separate what he thought from what the evidence said. His name was Deputy Carver, and he asked different questions than his partner. He asked about the marks. He asked about the water bottle. He asked about the highway marker specifically, the mile, the time, the physical condition Ryder had found Mia in, and he wrote all of it down in a way that felt like someone building a structure rather than filling out a form. Hatch sat against the far wall and said almost nothing, which was the right choice, and both of them knew it. Mia gave her statement once, to both deputies simultaneously, sitting beside Evelyn, her notebook open in front of her to the cross-section drawing. She told it the same way she'd told it to Evelyn, flat, factual, precise. And she showed them the drawing, and she showed them the marks on her wrists, and she said, at the end, in that same stripped-down voice she'd used on the highway, I know you probably don't believe me. Because of them. Because of how they look. But I drew it 2 years ago, and the map is right there, and those two things match. Deputy Carver looked at the map, looked at the drawing, looked at Mia. I believe you, he said. His partner looked at him. I said I believe her, Carver said, not looking at his partner, looking at Mia. That doesn't mean I get to decide anything on my own, but I'm putting it in the report that I believe her. Mia looked at him for a long moment, then she looked at Ryder. She was looking for confirmation that what had just happened was real, that a person in an official position had said the words out loud, in front of witnesses, without taking them back. Ryder nodded. Once. Real. It was the other deputy who made the call. Ryder found out about it in the parking lot, where he'd gone to give the library space and to stand in the heat and think. And he found out because Hatch came outside and stood beside him and said, They called the Harpers. I know, Ryder said. You knew. I saw him on the radio at the back of the room, the partner, while Carver was writing up the report. Hatch was quiet for a moment. So they know where she is. They knew within the first hour. Another moment. The heat pressed down. The sound of the water distribution line down the block was a low murmur of human voices doing what people do when they're waiting for something they need. "David Harper's going to be here," Hatch said. "He's already on his way," Ryder said. 40 minutes ago." "Then we've got 20 minutes, Ryder said. "Maybe 15. Hatch looked at him. "What do you want to do?" Ryder looked at the library door. Through it, in the way you feel presences. Inside was a 10-year-old girl with marks on her wrists and a notebook that held 2 years of careful, meticulous documentation and a drawing that matched a 50-year-old survey map of an underground water reserve. Outside was a town where this man, this good man, this Little League coach, this charitable committee member, had the kind of standing that made people's faces close when you suggested he was something other than what he appeared to be. And coming down the road, in about 15 minutes, was the thing that standing could do when it decided to move. "Call the others," Ryder said. Hatch looked at him carefully. "Define others." "Anyone in the network who's within 2 hours, not for trouble." He looked at Hatch directly. "For witness, for testimony, for the kind of presence in a room that makes people remember that there are consequences for how they handle the next hour." "You're talking about a show of force." "I'm talking about a show of existence," Ryder said. "That's different." Hatch pulled out his phone. He made 3 calls, each under 90 seconds, while Ryder stood with his back against the library wall and watched the road at the end of the main drag and waited for the shape of a vehicle he'd never seen but already knew. The 3rd call Hatch was still on when the white pickup truck appeared at the end of the street. New, clean, moving at the careful speed of a man who was very aware of being watched and who wanted to be seen moving carefully. It pulled into the library parking lot and stopped, and David Harper got out of the driver's side, and Carol Harper got out of the passenger side, and they both moved with the particular grace of people who had been performing credibility for so long that it had become involuntary. David Harper was 44 years old, and he had the build of someone who had played sports once and was maintaining the architecture of that. He looked at Ryder and Hatch with an expression of such careful, managed concern that it was almost technically perfect. Worry without aggression, a father's alarm without any accusatory edge. He was very, very good at this. "I'm David Harper," he said. "That's my daughter in there." "I know who you are," Ryder said. Harper's expression didn't change. "I want to thank you," he said, "for finding her, for taking care of her. I can't imagine what you must have thought when you found her out there. She's been having some difficulties, some behavioral issues. She tends to—" "Stop," Ryder said. Harper stopped. Ryder looked at him for a long moment. He kept his voice level. He kept his hands visible, both of them, at his sides, because he was aware of exactly how this scene looked from the outside. And he was not going to give the deputy's partner, who was now standing in the library doorway, anything to work with. "The deputies are inside," Ryder said. "There's a county survey map on the table that I think you should look at, and your daughter has something she wants to say to you in front of witnesses." Harper's expression finally did something real. It was only there for a second, a tightening around the eyes, a fractional change in the jaw, and then the careful, managed mask came back down over it like a curtain. But Ryder had seen it, and across the parking lot, Hatch had seen it too, and he lowered his phone from his ear and looked at Ryder and gave the smallest possible nod. "Got it." Carol Harper had not spoken. She was standing slightly behind her husband, and she was looking at the library door with an expression that was not the expression of a mother whose child had been missing for 12 hours and had just been found. It was the expression of someone calculating. "Of course," David Harper said. "Smooth. Recovered. Of course. We want to hear everything she has to say." He started toward the library door. "One more thing," Ryder said. Harper stopped, turned. "That underground reserve," Ryder said, keeping his voice entirely neutral, just a man having a factual conversation in a parking lot. "The one under your property, the 50,000-gallon cistern from 1954. The County Water Authority is going to want to verify its current status." A pause. "Today." David Harper's face did the thing again. Faster this time, quicker to recover, but it was there, and it was something Ryder recognized from the rooms he'd spent 2 tours learning to read. The micro-expression of a man who has just realized the thing he thought was buried has surfaced. And behind him, Carol Harper put her hand flat against the side of the pickup truck, and the sound of her palm against the metal was the only sound in the parking lot, and Ryder heard in that small, involuntary sound the thing that David Harper's controlled face was refusing to show him. He turned back to the library door and put his hand on it, and he was about to push it open when his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. It was a number he didn't have saved. Area code for Caldera. The text was 4 words. She told us already. He read it twice. He turned around slowly and looked at David Harper, who was standing very still in the middle of the parking lot, and he looked at the white pickup truck, and he looked at the water distribution line down the block. The line of people with their jugs and bottles, waiting for allocations from tanks on a flatbed, waiting for the committee to decide how much they could have. He thought about Danny. He thought about the particular way that power worked in small places, the way it wore the face of the community and called itself service, and managed every perception from the inside out, so that by the time anyone looked hard enough to see the structure underneath, the structure had already been there for years. He pushed the library door open. Inside, Mia was standing at the table. She was not sitting. She was standing, both hands on the notebook, and she was looking at the door, at him, with an expression that he had not seen on her face before. It was not fear. It wasn't. It was the expression of someone who has just made a decision they cannot take back, who has stepped off a ledge and is now in the air, committed to the physics of it, and is looking at the one person in the room they believe can catch them. They tested it, she said. Her voice was steady. She was looking at Ryder. The water. Someone did a test. Mrs. Brooks got the results this morning from the water authority she contacted 6 months ago. She paused. It came back showing active draw. From the Harper property. Active draw for the last 2 years. Evelyn Brooks was standing beside her with a single printed page held in both hands like evidence, which it was. Deputy Carver was on his radio. The partner was in the doorway, and he had turned around and was looking at the parking lot, at David Harper, and his face was doing the complicated, difficult thing that faces do when the story someone told you before you walked into a room has just been definitively revised. And David Harper was in the doorway behind Ryder, close enough that Ryder could feel him there without turning, close enough to hear the sound of a man's composure finally, audibly, drawing its last organized breath. "Mia," Harper said. His voice had lost something, not the smoothness, not quite, but the foundation under it. Mia looked past Ryder. She looked at her father. "The whole town was thirsty," she said, "and you knew where the water was." The silence that followed was the kind that changes the shape of a room. And in that silence, Ryder heard, from outside, down the main drag, growing, the sound of 2 engines, then 4. Then the particular layered chord of a group of Harley-Davidsons running together at low speed through a town's main street, the kind of sound that makes people step out of doorways to look, the kind of sound that had arrived exactly when Hatch's 3 calls had been calculated to produce it. Not for trouble, for witness. For the specific gravity that a group of large, scarred, leather-wearing men can provide to a room where the truth is trying to get air. Ryder looked at Mia. She looked back. "I've got you," he said. The same 3 words he hadn't said on the highway because he hadn't known yet if he was allowed to mean them. He said them now because he did. But the thing he didn't know yet, the thing none of them knew, not even Evelyn Brooks with her survey maps and her water authority correspondence, and her 50 years of watching this town, was what David Harper had done in the 40 minutes between getting the call from the deputy and arriving at this library, and what he had already put in motion and how far it had already gone. The sound of the engines outside filled the street, and David Harper's phone in his jacket pocket buzzed once. He looked at it, and the expression that moved through his face then was not the expression of a man who had been caught. It was the expression of a man who had already made his next move. David Harper looked at his phone for 3 seconds. 3 seconds was not a long time. It was long enough to read 4 words, maybe 5. It was long enough for the expression on his face to complete its journey from controlled to something else, something that lived underneath controlled, the actual architecture of the man, briefly visible the way a foundation becomes visible when the house above it shifts. Then he put the phone in his pocket, and he smiled, not at Ryder, not at Mia. At the room in general, the way a man smiles when he has decided to change the game he's been playing. "Deputy Carver," he said, stepping fully into the library, his voice back to its managed register. "I think there's been a significant misunderstanding here, and I'd like the opportunity to address it, all of it, officially." He looked at Carver directly. "At the station." with the county attorney present. Carver looked at him, looked at the printed page in Evelyn's hands, looked at Mia. That's your right, Carver said carefully. I'd also like to formally request, Harper continued, that my daughter be placed in temporary county protective custody pending the resolution of these allegations for her safety. A pause waited with practiced concern. Given the circumstances of how she was found and by whom, the sentence landed the way it was designed to land. Ryder felt it hit the room, felt the partner in the doorway respond to it, felt the slight shift in Carver's posture as the legal architecture of the request registered. Temporary county protective custody. Not the parents. Not Ryder. The county. Neutral ground. On paper. In practice, the machine, which David Harper had spent 3 years embedding himself in, taking the girl back into a system where he had contacts, relationships, and 48 hours of procedural delay to work with. Ryder looked at me. She had understood it before he had. She was 10 years old, and she had been reading rooms her entire life, and she had understood it the moment the words were out of her father's mouth. And what he saw on her face was not fear, exactly. It was the expression of someone watching the exit door close. No, Ryder said. Harper looked at him. She's not going anywhere with anyone until the water authority does a physical inspection of your property. Ryder kept his voice completely level. The engine of it was running at a very high temperature underneath, but the surface was smooth, because this was the kind of moment where the surface being smooth was the only thing that mattered. That's what Deputy Carver is calling in right now. Carver, to his credit, was already on the radio again. Ryder did not know what Carver was going to do, not exactly, did not know how much spine the man had, or how much the system he worked inside was going to give him room to use it. But Carver was writing things down, and he was doing it with the deliberate, unhurried movement of someone who was committing to a version of events before it could be revised. Harper looked at Ryder for a long moment. You have no standing here, he said. Quiet. Still managed. But the thing underneath was showing around the edges now, the way cold shows around the seal of a door. You found a child on a highway. That's the beginning and end of your involvement. The drawing, Mia said. Everyone looked at her. She had picked up the notebook. She had it open to the cross-section drawing, and she was holding it up, and she was looking at her father, and her voice, when she spoke again, had none of the flat reported quality in it. It had something else, something that had been waiting a long time for air. I drew it 2 years ago, she said. I drew it from what I remembered, and it matches. You know it matches. She looked at him, and the gray eyes were steady, and the steadiness of them was the most devastating thing in the room. I remember the room, Dad. I remember the door and the floor, and the tanks, and the pipes. I was 5 years old, and I walked in, and you moved me out so fast, and I never forgot it. She lowered the notebook. I never forgot anything. David Harper looked at his daughter. For a moment, just a moment, the mask came entirely off. What was underneath it was not the monster Ryder had been constructing in his mind. It was something almost worse, a man who knew exactly what he had done and had built a complete internal justification for it, year by year, layer by layer, until the justification had become load-bearing, structural, the thing his identity was resting on. A man who looked at his daughter and saw, not a child he had failed, but a threat to the architecture of himself. Then the mask came back. We'll sort this out at the station, he said. To Carver. To the room. To no one. He turned and walked out. Carol Harper had not spoken once. She followed him, and the sound of the door closing behind them was ordinary. The specific sound of a library door on its pneumatic hinge, and it was somehow the wrongest sound Ryder had heard in a long time. Outside, the 4 bikes had parked along the main drag in a line that was not aggressive and was not accidental. 2 men Ryder knew, Perez and a younger rider they called Slate, out of the Tucson network, were standing beside their machines in the particular way that large men stand when they are making themselves available without making themselves threatening. The 3rd and 4th were brothers Ryder had ridden with twice before, Domingo and his cousin Teo, who had come from 60 miles east and arrived with the particular silence of men who had been called and come without needing the full picture explained. Hatch was with them. Ryder walked out of the library and across the sidewalk and stood with Hatch, while the white pickup truck pulled out of the parking lot at the careful, visible speed of a man performing calm. He made a call, Ryder said. In the 40 minutes before he got here. I know, Hatch said. What does that mean? Hatch was quiet for a moment. He was watching the truck move down the main drag. It means he's had a contingency, probably more than one. He looked at Ryder. Men like Harper don't walk into a situation like this without an exit already mapped. Ryder looked at the water distribution line. It had grown since the morning. More people, more containers, the line extending further down the block. He looked at the flatbed with its 3 tanks and the 2 county workers managing the distribution, and he thought about 50,000 gallons sitting sealed under a house 2 miles away and a man who knew where it was and had been controlling access to it for years while his neighbors stood in line. Who did he call? Ryder said. That's what I've been working on for the last hour, Hatch said. He pulled out his phone. Not to make a call, to show Ryder the screen. A text chain, 3 messages deep, from a number Hatch had in his contacts under a name that Ryder didn't recognize. The first message. Harper activated the county legal fund. Attorney General's office is being briefed. The second? There's a prior record pull on a Ryder Cole. 2 counties. They're going to use it. The third, sent 11 minutes ago. The other deputy filed an independent report. Carver's being pulled from the case. Ryder read the 3 messages. He read them again. His prior record. 2 counties. There was nothing violent in it. He had been careful, over the years, to be careful. But there was enough. An arrest in 2014 that hadn't resulted in conviction, but existed in the system. A civil matter in 2017 involving a property dispute that had escalated and been resolved, but left a paper trace. The kind of record that, pulled and presented in the right context, in front of the right people, could be used to paint a very specific picture of a man who had taken a child from a highway. Not saved her, taken her. The language was everything. He knew that. He had known it on the highway when he'd made the choice to not call anyone. He had known it in the library when Harper had said, given the circumstances of how she was found, and by whom. He had known it the way you know things that you've been trying not to look at directly. They're going to flip it, Hatch said. Yeah. Ryder, I know. If they pull Carver and put the partner on it, I know, Hatch. Then by tonight the story is a biker with a record took a missing child and held her in an abandoned structure, and the family is the victim, and the water reserve is a misunderstanding, Ryder said. A disputed historical record. An old map. He looked at the library door, through it, at the notebook on the table inside, at the drawing, at the printed Water Authority test results in Evelyn's hands. The evidence, he said, is in a library, Hatch said. That Harper can have the county attorney file an access order on by end of business today. Ryder turned and walked back into the library. Evelyn Brooks was at her desk when he came in. Mia was in the reading corner, the notebook in her lap, her knees pulled to her chest. Deputy Carver was still there, on his phone now, standing near the window, his back to the room. The body language of a man navigating something that was getting complicated faster than he'd anticipated. Ryder went straight to Evelyn. The Water Authority test results, he said. How many copies? She looked at him. Assessed the change in his register, the faster pace of it, the stripped-down quality. 1 printed. The original is in their system. Is it in a system Harper can access? A pause. He's on the board. Then he can flag it, delay it, get it pulled for verification while the Attorney General's office builds its case. He kept his voice low. Carver was still on the phone. The survey map. Original is in the county records office. My copy is a scan I made 4 years ago. She looked at him steadily. I have it on a drive. Get the drive, he said. Right now. And anything else that exists only in this room. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she stood and moved to the filing cabinet. Ryder went to Mia. She looked up from the notebook when he crouched down in front of her, bringing himself to her eye level, and what she saw in his face made her unfold slightly from the defensive posture. Listen to me, he said, quiet, direct. Your dad made some calls before he came here. He has people, official people, who are going to try to change the story about what happened on that highway. She looked at him, the gray eyes processing. To make it about you. Yeah. To make it look like you. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. That's not what happened. I know that. You know that. He looked at her carefully. But I need you to know what might happen in the next few hours so it doesn't blindside you. Because blindsiding people is how this works. You don't see it coming, and by the time you do, the version of the story they built has already been running for 6 hours and it's got traction. She was quiet for a moment. What do we do? The notebook, he said. Is there anything in it you haven't shown us yet? Something moved through her expression. She looked down at the notebook in her lap. Her hands tightened on the cover slightly, that protective reflex, and then she made a visible decision. He could see it, the choosing, the letting go of the protection. And she opened it, not to the cross-section drawing, further back. The older pages, the ones with smaller, more cramped handwriting between the drawings, the pages that looked like they had been filled in over a long period of time in multiple inks and pencil weights. I wrote dates, she said. Every time. She turned the pages for him. Every time the cup didn't come. Every time I heard them talking when they thought I was asleep. Every time... She stopped on a page. A drawing, but also writing. Dense, small, careful. I heard my dad on the phone about 18 months ago. He was talking to someone about the distribution numbers, about making sure certain families stayed below the threshold, so they wouldn't have grounds to file a resource complaint. She looked at Ryder. I didn't understand all of it, but I wrote down what I heard, word for word, because that's what I do. I write down what I hear. Ryder looked at the page. He looked at the careful, cramped handwriting of a child who had spent years in a room alone developing the one form of power available to her, the recording of truth. The date on this, he said, March 15th, last year. She turned 2 more pages. And here, July. He was on the phone again, something about the County Water Authority board meeting, about making sure the inspection schedule got adjusted. Ryder sat back. He understood now the full shape of it. Not just a family denying water to a child, not just an old cistern tapped in secret, something that had been running as a coordinated operation for years. The committee position, the board membership, the distribution management, the inspection scheduling, the controlled information flow. A man who had built himself into the infrastructure of a town's survival and used that position to manage who got what and when, and had been doing it so smoothly, so incrementally, that the people depending on that infrastructure had no idea. The hand controlling it had a thumb on the scale. The drought hadn't just happened to Caldera. It had been managed, shaped. The natural shortage had been real, but the distribution of what remained had been curated. Certain families, and Ryder did not yet know which ones or why, but he was going to find out, had been held below the threshold for filing a resource complaint, kept just short of the legal trigger that would have mandated an independent investigation. Mia, he said. Yeah. This notebook, this specific page, this is the most important thing in this room. He held her gaze. More important than the map, more important than the water test, because the map proves what's under the ground, and the test proves it's being drawn. But this, he put his finger near the page, not touching it. This proves why. She looked at the page. I know, she said quietly. That's why I didn't show anyone before. Because you were afraid. Because I knew once I showed it, I couldn't unshow it. She looked up at him. And I wasn't sure anyone would... She stopped, breathed. I wasn't sure it would be enough. And if it wasn't enough, and I'd shown it, and they got it away from me. Her voice held steady, but it cost her something. Then I'd have nothing left. He looked at her. At the 10-year-old who had spent 2 years conducting an investigation from a locked room, collecting evidence with the methodical patience of someone who understood that the only currency available to her was information, and had held it until the moment she could be sure it would be received. It's enough, he said. He said it the way you say things that you need the other person to carry, not with reassurance, which was soft and conditional, but with a specificity that made it a fact rather than a comfort. It is enough. Present tense. Declarative. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she carefully tore the 2 pages out of the notebook. No, he started. The notebook stays with me, she said, but these go somewhere else. Separate. She folded them with careful, precise movements. If they take the notebook, they don't get these. If they get these, they don't get the notebook. She looked at him with the gray eyes steady. Don't put everything in one place. I learned that a long time ago. He took the folded pages. He stood up and walked to Evelyn, who was at the filing cabinet with a small thumb drive in her hand and a second printed copy of the water test results that she had apparently made at some point without announcing it, and he handed her the folded pages without explanation, and she took them without asking for one and put them inside the book she was holding, a copy of the Caldera County Property Records, 1940-1960, and put the book on the shelf behind her desk between two identical volumes where it was invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. "Carver," Ryder said. The deputy turned from the window. He had the phone still in his hand, and his face had the particular arrangement of someone who had just been told something they were not happy about. "They're pulling you," Ryder said. Not a question. Carver looked at him. A long moment. "Reassigning," he said. "Conflict of interest. My prior report is being reviewed." "By who?" "County Attorney's Office." His jaw worked. "As of—" He checked his watch. 12 minutes ago. "How long do we have?" "Before what?" "Before the next version of the story becomes official." Carver was quiet for a moment. He was doing the internal calculation that Ryder recognized, the one that every person who works inside a system does when the system is being used against the thing it exists to protect. The calculation between what you're supposed to do and what you know is right, and how far the distance is between those two things, and whether you can live with whatever you choose. "The physical inspection of the Harper property," Carver said. "If it happens before I'm off the case, it's on record under my report number. It becomes part of the existing file, not a new one." He paused. "If someone were to request it right now, formally, in writing, referencing case number." He wrote something on a page from his notebook and set it on the desk beside Evelyn's hand. "It would be processed under the current case structure." Evelyn looked at the case number. She looked at Carver. "I'll need a pen," she said. The inspection request was filed at 11:42 a.m. The County Water Authority confirmed receipt at 11:59. At 12:15, Harper's attorney, a man from Albuquerque who had arrived in Caldera in under 2 hours, which told Ryder exactly how prepared Harper had been for this possibility, filed a motion to delay the inspection pending a review of the authorization chain. At 12:40, the motion was granted. 48 hours. They had 48 hours before the inspection could proceed, which meant 48 hours in which the story could be shaped, the record could be challenged, and a 10-year-old girl's 2 years of carefully kept evidence could be framed as the documentation of a child with behavioral difficulties and a history of making false accusations. That last part, the history, Ryder found out about at 1 in the afternoon from Hatch in the parking lot, in the way that the worst information always arrived, sideways, from a direction you weren't facing. "There's a school record," Hatch said, "filed 8 months ago. It's in the county system." He had his phone out again, reading from a text. A report from the school counselor, documenting a pattern of, quote, "fabricated narratives and attention-seeking behavior," signed by the counselor and countersigned by both parents. Ryder looked at the phone. "She never told a counselor anything," he said. He was certain of this, not because he knew Mia's history comprehensively, but because he had watched her calibrate trust over the last 18 hours. And he knew, in the way you know certain things about certain people, that she had not spent her credibility on someone she wasn't sure of. "No," Hatch said. "She didn't, but the record says she did." The thing that moved through Ryder then was not anger. It had gotten past anger. It was the cold, clean clarity that lives on the other side of anger. The state where everything becomes very simple, because there is only one thing left that matters, and all the other things fall away. He had seen it in Danny's file, afterward. The things that had been written about his brother before the end, the assessments, the characterizations, the paper trail that had been built around him by the people who needed his version of events to be the wrong version. He had spent 3 years after Danny died trying to understand how it had been done so completely, how a person could be so thoroughly surrounded by an official narrative that even the people who knew them started to doubt. He understood it now. He understood the mechanism of it. And he understood that it had been running on Mia Harper for at least 8 months, and that meant it had started 8 months ago, which meant something had triggered it. 8 months ago, he said. What happened in Caldera 8 months ago? Hatch looked at him. The county filed its annual water resource report, Hatch said slowly, like he was building the sentence as he found the pieces. And it came back showing that the municipal reserve was down 30% from projections. which should have triggered a mandatory independent audit, which didn't happen, which was deferred, Hatch said, pending a review of the reporting methodology. He looked at Ryder. Submitted by the chair of the County Water Authority Board Review Committee. Harper. 8 months ago, someone had gotten close enough to threatening the operation that Harper had started building a preemptive record against the person most likely to dismantle it, his own daughter. The one person who had been in the house. The one person who had seen the room when she was 5 years old and had never, despite everything, forgotten. He had known. He had known she remembered. The water rationing, the isolation, the cup. It wasn't only control. It was silencing. Keep her weak enough, keep her discredited enough, build enough of a paper record around her. And if she ever said anything, the architecture was already in place to receive it as the output of a troubled child rather than a witness. Ryder stood in the parking lot and looked at the water distribution line and felt the cold clarity settle into something that was going to be very hard to move. He went back inside. Mia was still in the reading corner. She had the notebook open, but she wasn't drawing. She was looking at the window, at the rectangle of hot white sky visible through the upper pane, with the expression of someone calculating distances. He sat down across from her. "There's a school record," he said, because she deserved the direct version. "In the county system, filed 8 months ago by the school counselor." She looked at him. "What does it say?" He told her. She listened without her face doing anything particular. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Galloway." "The counselor." "She came to the house," Mia said, "for a home visit. My parents do. They're very good with the school. They volunteer, they donate. Mrs. Galloway came for a home visit, and they had tea, and my mom cried about how worried they were about me." She looked at her hands. "I wasn't in the room, but I could hear it through the floor. Mrs. Galloway kept saying she was sure it would work out. She sounded like someone who had already decided what she thought and was being polite about it. Did you ever talk to Galloway yourself? She stopped me in the hall once, asked how I was doing at home." A pause. "I said fine." She looked at him directly. "Because I didn't know her. And because you don't say things like that in a hallway, in 30 seconds, to someone you don't know." "You say them when you're sure," Ryder said. "You say them when you're sure," she agreed. She looked at the notebook. 8 months ago, that's when they—" She stopped. Something was assembling behind her eyes, working through a sequence. "That's when they changed the cup." "What do you mean?" "Before that, I got the cup in the morning, regular, every day." She looked at the table. 8 months ago, they started skipping days. Randomly. No pattern. Sometimes I'd have the cup 3 days in a row and then nothing for 2 days. Sometimes 1 day and nothing for 4. She looked at him. I thought maybe I'd done something. I tried to figure out what I'd done." Her voice was very steady, and the steadiness of it was the saddest thing. "I spent months trying to figure out what I'd done." "You hadn't done anything," Ryder said. "I know that now." She closed the notebook. "They were making me unpredictable, so that if I ever did say something—" She stopped, breathed. "I'd look unstable. I'd look like I was describing things that weren't consistent, because they weren't consistent, because they were designing them not to be." The silence in the library had a weight to it that pressed on everything. Ryder became aware, at the edge of his perception, of a change in the sound outside. The engines had been a background presence all morning. The Desert Iron Riders on the main drag, idling, present. The sound changed. Not louder, different. The specific chord shift that happened when machines moved. He went to the window. 2 of the 4 bikes were moving. Perez and Slate, pulling out of their positions and riding slowly. Not away from the library, parallel to it, down the side street. He watched them and tried to read the movement, and then Hatch was in the doorway. "We've got a problem," Hatch said. His voice had a quality Ryder had heard maybe 4 times in 11 years. The quality of a man delivering information that is going to change the next several hours in a way that cannot be undone. "Talk," Ryder said. "Domingo just called. Harper's attorney didn't just file the inspection delay." Hatch looked at him. "He filed a restraining order against you personally. Emergency basis, citing the prior record and the circumstances of when. Signed 20 minutes ago. Being served." Hatch checked his phone. In approximately the next 15 minutes, local sheriff's deputy, not county. Ryder absorbed this. A restraining order, emergency basis, meant he could not be within 500 feet of Mia Harper pending a hearing. The hearing would be scheduled. The timeline would be as long as Harper's attorney needed it to be. And in the meantime, the preemptive school record would be entered into evidence, and the prior arrest would be entered into evidence, and the picture would be assembled piece by piece in the official record while the inspection was delayed and Carver was off the case and the 48-hour clock ran. "Evelyn," Ryder said. She was already at his shoulder. She had heard. "If you're served," she said, "you have to comply. Immediately and completely. Any violation becomes the lead." She looked at him with the direct, clear eyes of someone who had spent 50 years watching the mechanics of power in small places. "The moment you're served, you cannot be here." Then Mia stays with me, Evelyn said. "I am formally requesting, as a licensed county-registered volunteer child advocate." She paused, and Ryder realized she had already assembled this, was prepared. "That Mia Harper remain in my presence pending the welfare review. I have standing. I have documentation." She looked at Ryder. "He can delay the inspection. He can pull Carver. He can issue a restraining order against you." Her voice was controlled and precise. "He cannot remove a child from a registered advocate's care without a court order, and that takes longer than 48 hours. Ryder looked at her. He looked at Mia, who had come to stand in the doorway of the reading corner and was watching all of this with those gray eyes that missed nothing. "You'll be okay," he said to her. He said it to give it to her, not because he was certain of it, because there was a difference between a thing being true and needing someone to have it anyway. She looked at him for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" "Something I should have done 8 months ago if I'd been here," he said, which didn't answer the question, but she received it anyway. "Ryder," Hatch in the doorway. "Car's coming." A county sheriff's vehicle, moving down the main drag at the careful official speed of someone executing a legal order. Ryder picked up his cut from the chair where he'd draped it and put it on and felt the weight of it settle onto his shoulders. And he looked at the room, at Evelyn with the thumb drive and the survey map and the book with the pages inside it, at Mia with the notebook and the gray eyes and 2 years of recorded truth that nobody had managed to take away from her yet. He thought about Danny. He thought about the hospital waiting room and the particular silence on the phone and the 3 hours that had been 3 hours too long. He was not going to be 3 hours too long again. He walked to the door and stopped and turned back once. "Evelyn," he said, "the families, the ones Harper held below the complaint threshold, I need the names." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because they're witnesses," he said, "and they don't know it yet." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she went to her desk and pulled a folded paper from the center drawer. A list, already prepared, names and addresses in the careful handwriting of someone who had been building this case in private for 18 months. And she held it out. He took it. He put it inside his cut, against his chest. He looked at Mia one last time. She raised one hand, small gesture, not a wave. Something else, an acknowledgement, a marking, the specific nonverbal thing that passes between people who have been in the desert together and come out the other side. He pushed through the library door. Outside, the sheriff's vehicle had stopped at the end of the block, and a deputy was getting out. The kind of deputy who was going to do his job regardless of what he thought about it. The kind of paperwork in hand walk that meant what it meant. Ryder walked toward him. I was not going to make the man cross the whole parking lot. That was a small thing, and it was also the only thing he could control right now. He was served on the sidewalk in front of Caldera Public Library at 1:27 p.m. on the hottest day of the summer. He read the document. He looked up at the deputy. "You know the Harpers," he said. The deputy looked at him. "Sir, not asking you to comment, just asking if you know them." A pause. "Most people in Caldera know the Harpers." "Most people in Caldera have been standing in that line," Ryder said, and looked at the water distribution queue down the block without looking away from the deputy's face, so the man had to choose which thing to look at. "For months, while the Harpers had 50,000 gallons under their house." The deputy's face did something it wasn't supposed to do while serving a legal document. Ryder folded the restraining order, put it in his cut, beside the list. He walked to the Road King and started the engine, and the sound of it was the sound of the only thing he had left in this particular equation, Movement. Forward. Fast. He pulled onto the main drag heading south and opened the throttle, and the wind hit him at 60 miles an hour, and he reached into his cut with one hand and felt the folded paper of Evelyn's list against his fingers. And he thought about what it meant. The names of the people who had been held below the threshold, who had been standing in line for months, who had been managed and rationed and controlled while 50,000 gallons sat sealed and dark and counted beneath a house with green shutters and a porch swing. The names of people who had no idea they were witnesses. The names of people who, if someone put them in a room and helped them understand what they had experienced, would constitute testimony that no attorney and no county board and no fabricated school record could dismantle. His phone buzzed against his thigh at 70 miles an hour. He didn't look at it. He looked at the road. Then it buzzed again. And again. 3 times in quick succession, and something in the pattern of it, the urgency of the interval, made him pull off the highway onto the gravel shoulder and stop the bike and pull the phone from his pocket. 3 messages. All from Hatch, sent within 40 seconds of each other. The first, they went in. The second, Harper, his property. Before the inspection could be officially filed. They're destroying it. The third was not words. It was a photograph, blurry, taken through a chain-link fence from a distance, time-stamped 11 minutes ago. A backhoe. On the Harper property. Tearing up the ground near the East Foundation wall. Tearing up the ground where, on a 50-year-old survey map and a 10-year-old girl's careful drawing, the access door to the underground cistern was marked. Ryder looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he understood what had been in David Harper's face when he'd looked at his phone in the library doorway. Not the expression of a man who had been caught. The expression of a man who had already decided that if he couldn't keep the secret, he was going to make sure there was nothing left to find. And somewhere in that library, with a restraining order keeping Ryder 500 feet away, and Carver off the case, and the Attorney General's office being briefed and the inspection delayed 48 hours, Evelyn Brooks and Mia Harper were the only witnesses to a destruction that was happening right now, in real time, in the ground beneath a house with green shutters. And when the 48 hours were up and the inspection finally came, there would be nothing left to confirm the map, nothing left to confirm the drawing, nothing left but a torn-up yard and a man with standing and a documented history of his daughter's behavioral difficulties, and the word of a child against the word of everyone who had ever trusted the face that David Harper had spent years building. Ryder looked at the photograph. He looked at the road. He thought about Danny and the hospital waiting room and the 3 hours. And for the first time in 15 years, the thing he felt was not guilt. It was something that required a different kind of response entirely. And it was going to burn every careful, managed, surface-level choice he had made in the last 18 hours to the ground. Because there was no careful path left, and he had just run out of the kind of time that allowed for one. He called Hatch from the shoulder of the highway, with the engine still running and the wind coming off the desert flats, carrying the particular dry heat of mid-afternoon and the photograph still open on his phone screen. "How long has the backhoe been on the property?" he said. "Domingo clocked it at 12:50, Hatch said. "Before we even knew about the restraining order." Harper made the call from the library parking lot. "Has to be." Ryder looked at the photograph again. The backhoe was positioned at the East Foundation wall, exactly where the survey map's dotted line terminated at the cistern access point. It was not subtle work, not the careful, deniable kind of excavation that might be explained as landscaping or foundation repair. It was removal, fast, deliberate, the work of someone who understood that the window for destruction was narrow and had contracted accordingly. "How many of us can get on that property in the next 30 minutes?" Ryder said. A pause. "Ryder, the restraining order doesn't cover the others." Another pause. Longer. "What exactly are you asking?" "I'm asking how many witnesses we can put on that property before they finish tearing up the access point. Witnesses with phones. Witnesses who can document what's being destroyed and what's underneath it before it's gone." He watched a semi-truck pass on the highway and felt the pressure wave of it move through him. That's all. Witnesses. He heard Hatch breathing, heard the calculation running. "Perez and Slade are 2 blocks from the Harper property right now," Hatch said. "Domingo and Teo are 6 minutes out. I'm 8. I need eyes on what's under that ground before the backhoe reaches it," Ryder said. "Whatever is down there, the tanks, the pipes, the infrastructure. Once it's torn up, it becomes debris. unidentifiable. The survey map becomes a historical document with no physical confirmation. He gripped the phone. Mia's drawing becomes a child's imagination. And if Harper's attorney files on the others, then we have a problem we deal with after. He looked at the road south, back toward Caldera. The restraining order had a radius. The library was within it. The Harper property was within it. The entire relevant geography of this situation existed inside a circle he was legally required to stay outside of. Go, he said. Hatch went. What happened on the Harper property in the following 19 minutes was documented on 4 phones by 5 men who had no legal authority and no official standing and every reason to be somewhere else, and who chose, with the full understanding of what it cost, not to be. Ryder heard it in real time from Slate's running commentary, clipped, breathless, the specific cadence of a man moving fast across unfamiliar terrain. We're at the east fence. Backhoe's still running. There's a guy operating it and 2 other men on the ground. Nobody from the county. No official presence. Private contractors, Ryder said. Has to be. No markings on the equipment. A pause. The sound of boots on dry ground. We're going over the fence. Slate. Already over. The sound changed. Closer. More directional. The hole is... Ryder, the hole is 8 feet deep already. There's something down there. Concrete. Old concrete, the kind with the aggregate showing. The voice tightened. There's a hatch. A metal hatch. Hinged, and they've got the backhoe bucket positioned to... They're going to collapse it. They're going to drop the bucket on it and collapse the access point. Get it on camera. Perez is filming. Domingo... The sound of the backhoe engine changed pitch. Revved. They see us, Slate said. What followed was not clean or cinematic. It was the sound of men shouting in the kind of heat that made everything louder and shorter and more immediate. The contractors calling out. The Desert Iron Riders not moving. The backhoe engine throttling down and then back up, and then the particular sharp crack of a metal bucket making contact with a concrete hatch edge at speed. They hit it, Slate said. His voice had gone flat, in the way voices go flat when what's happening is too fast for inflection. Partial contact. The hatch is... It's damaged, but it's not collapsed. Perez is at the edge. He's shooting straight down. What's down there? A long second. The sound of wind and machinery and men. Tanks, Slate said. Big ones. Industrial scale. Steel, painted gray, and there are pipes running north toward the main municipal line, Ryder. This isn't just a cistern. This isn't just a reserve. There's infrastructure here that connects to the town supply. Not just taking from the reserve, feeding back into the municipal line on a controlled basis, managing the flow. The drought hadn't just been rationed from above, it had been managed from below, the existing reserve being metered out through a private connection that ran beneath the property and into the town's own supply infrastructure, so that Harper controlled not just how much the reserve held, but how much the town received and when and in what quantities and at what point the shortage became critical enough to require emergency measures that he, as committee chair, then administered. The full machinery of it opened up in Ryder's mind like a map unfolding. His phone buzzed. Hatch. County sheriff just got a call. Someone reported trespassing on the Harper property. They're rolling. Then Slate, in his ear. Sheriff's coming. We've got maybe 4 minutes. The footage, Ryder said. All of it. Every phone. Right now, upload everything to... He thought fast. Evelyn. Send it to Hatch. Hatch forwards to Evelyn. The library's IP address goes into the upload metadata, and it timestamps under her account. It becomes part of her 18-month documentation file. I was already moving, already turning the Road King around on the gravel shoulder, already knowing what he was doing next and what it was going to cost. Go. We're not leaving, Slate said. Slate, we're not leaving until the sheriff gets here. You want witnesses? We're witnesses. We stand here and we let them document us standing here, and when they write the report, they have to write what we saw. A pause. That's how this, right? You told Hatch, not for trouble, for witness. Ryder sat on the Road King on the highway's shoulder and looked at the road south and felt something move through him that was not something he had a clean name for. Yeah, he said. That's how it works. He opened the throttle. Not south, not away. The restraining order had a radius. He had measured it in his head while standing on the library sidewalk reading the document, 500 feet from Mia Harper's person, from the library, from the Harper residence, from the Harper residence, not from the street outside the Harper residence, not from the public right-of-way adjacent to the property. He knew where the line was. He found it, the edge of it, the invisible legal perimeter. And he stopped the Road King on a public street with the Harper property's roofline visible above the tree line, and the sound of the backhoe still running, and the sound of 4 desert iron bikes idling in the yard beyond the fence, and he waited. The sheriff's vehicle arrived in 3 minutes. Then a second one. Then, and this was the thing Harper's attorney had not accounted for, the piece that Ryder had not planned exactly, but had perhaps hoped for in the part of him that still believed in certain kinds of convergence. Deputy Carver's personal vehicle. Not a sheriff's unit. His own car. Civilian plates, a man who was officially off the case and had no authority, and was here anyway. Carver got out of his car and walked to the fence and looked at the hole and looked at the footage Perez showed him on the phone screen, and his face did the thing it had done in the library. The controlled, difficult thing of a man who is doing the right thing at professional cost. He got on his phone. Not the radio. His phone. Ryder watched from the edge of the legal radius and listened to the backhoe engine cut out in the desert go quiet around it, and the sound of the sheriff's deputies managing the scene, voices, radio, the specific choreography of official response, arriving too late for prevention, but not too late for documentation. His phone rang. Hatch. The footage is with Evelyn, Hatch said. Time-stamped, uploaded, cataloged under her documentation file. The hatch, Ryder said. Did Perez get the hatch on camera before they hit it? Ryder. A pause. He got the hatch, the tanks, the pipes, the municipal connection point, and he got the bucket making contact. Another pause. He got all of it. The sun was at 4 o'clock position, dropping toward the west ridge, and the heat was still brutal but had lost its peak, the temperature somewhere in the 105 range and falling slowly, and the shadow of the Ridge Road trees crossed the public street where Ryder sat on the Road King, and he felt the shadow on his skin like something deliberate. His phone buzzed again. Evelyn. Text. Carver called the State Water Authority. Not county, state. They have independent jurisdiction. They are responding. ETA 2 hours. He read it twice. State Authority. Independent jurisdiction. Not subject to the county attorney's delay motion. Not subject to Harper's board membership. Not within the architecture of influence that Harper had spent 3 years building, because state jurisdiction operated above the level where Harper had constructed his protections. 2 hours. He texted back. Mia. Evelyn's response was immediate. Safe. With me. She wants to know where you are. He looked at the property roofline above the trees, at the edge of the legal radius he was sitting on, at the road that connected where he was to where she was, 2 miles, maybe less, every inch of it inside the restraining order's circle. He texted, Tell her I'm at the line. 3 minutes passed. His phone buzzed. Evelyn's number, but the message was different, shorter, the syntax of it, the particular compression. I know where the line is. I've been at it my whole life. Don't move. I'm sending you something. And then, 30 seconds later, a photograph. A photograph of a page from the notebook. Not the cross-section drawing, not the dated entries. An older page near the back that he hadn't seen when she'd shown him the earlier material. A drawing of a girl at a window. Small, precise, carefully rendered in the way Mia rendered everything she needed to remember. The window had bars on it. Not physical bars, drawn bars. The symbolic architecture of a child making sense of captivity through image. Outside the window was a highway, and on the highway, so small it was almost not there, a motorcycle. She had drawn it before the highway, before mile marker 47, before any of it. He sat on the road, king in the public street at the edge of a legal boundary, and looked at a drawing that a 10-year-old girl had made of a future she hadn't known yet, and he felt something shift in the region of his chest in a way that made it briefly difficult to breathe. His phone rang. Number he didn't know. He answered. Mr. Cole. A woman's voice, professional, precise, the particular cadence of someone who dealt in official weight. My name is Sandra Okafor. I'm with the New Mexico State Water Authority, Emergency Response Division. Deputy Carver has briefed me on the situation. A pause. I need you to tell me everything you know about the infrastructure you believe exists under the Harper property. I have 2 hours before I'm on site, and I need to know what I'm walking into. He looked at the road. I need you to start from the photograph, she said, the one your men took in the yard. He started from the photograph. He talked for 40 minutes, sitting on the Road King at the edge of the invisible line, while the sun continued its descent and the desert cooled 1 degree at a time, and the sounds from the Harper property resolved from chaos into the specific, procedural sounds of a scene being officially managed, and somewhere 2 miles north on the main drag, in a library that smelled like paper and something faintly herbal, a 10-year-old girl sat with an old woman and a notebook and waited for the state water authority to arrive. And in a house with green shutters and a porch swing that moved in the evening breeze, David Harper stood in his kitchen and looked at his phone and understood for the first time that the thing he had built was not going to survive the night. He made one more call. Ryder heard about it 8 minutes later from Slate, who had been listening to the sheriff's deputies manage the yard and had caught the fragment of a radio transmission that no one had intended to be overheard. Harper had called his attorney. His attorney had told him the state authorities' arrival changed everything. And Harper had said 4 words that his attorney had tried to cut off but hadn't cut off fast enough. 4 words that Slate relayed to Ryder in the flat, careful voice of someone delivering information that changes the shape of what comes next. He said, "The girl has proof." Not the girl is lying, not the girl is confused, not the vocabulary of a man managing a troubled child's false narrative. The girl has proof. The vocabulary of a man who had always known exactly what his daughter had seen and had spent 5 years building a prison around her to contain it, and had just admitted, in 4 words to his own attorney, that every fabricated school record, and every rationed cup, and every locked cabinet, and every desperate controlled manipulation had been aimed at a single target, a 10-year-old girl's memory of something she was 5 years old when she saw. Ryder sat on the Road King and looked at the road and felt the cold clarity from earlier return, cleaner now, more specific, shaped by the 40 minutes of talking to Okafor and the photograph of the drawing and the 4 words that Harper had said. The state authority was 2 hours out. Harper's next move was already in motion. And Mia Harper was in a library 2 miles inside the radius of a restraining order that had been designed specifically to make sure Ryder Cole could not be the person standing between her and whatever David Harper had decided to do next. He looked at his phone. He looked at the road. He looked at the invisible line. He crossed the line. Not on the bike. On foot, leaving the Road King on the public street at the edge of the radius, kickstand down, engine off, the machine sitting in the last amber light of the afternoon like something patient. He walked the 2 miles inside the restraining order's circle, with the folded legal document still in his cut and his phone in his hand, and the full understanding of what crossing the line meant, what it would cost, what it would add to the record, what Harper's attorney would do with it in the morning. He walked anyway. Because Harper had said the girl has proof, and that was the language of a man making a calculation. And Ryder had spent 19 hours learning how David Harper's calculations worked, and the conclusion he had reached on the public street at the edge of the legal radius was the same conclusion he had reached at mile marker 47 on Highway 9. That 20 feet past the problem and still moving was a choice, and he had already made the other one. He came through the library door at 6:14 p.m. Mia was at the reading table with Evelyn, and she looked up when the door opened, and what moved through her face when she saw him was not relief exactly. It was the particular expression of someone whose internal calculation, the one they've been running continuously, the one that tracks the probability of being abandoned, has just returned an unexpected result. He crossed to the table and sat down. "You crossed the line," she said. "Yeah. They'll use that." "I know." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she slid the notebook across the table to him. Open, face up, to the page with the drawing of the girl at the window with the motorcycle on the highway outside. She put her finger on the motorcycle, small, precise, the size of a thumbnail. "I drew that 8 months ago," she said, "when I started being afraid." She looked at him. "I didn't know who it was going to be. I drew what I needed." He looked at the drawing. "I'm here," he said. She nodded. Once, like a fact confirmed. Sandra Okafor arrived at 7:53 p.m. with 2 engineers, a state water authority inspector, and a court order that operated entirely outside the county system Harper had spent 3 years cultivating. She was 46 years old and moved with the efficiency of someone who had spent 2 decades navigating the intersection of environmental law and political obstruction and had long since stopped being surprised by either. She went to the Harper property with the sheriff's deputies and the engineers and 2 members of the Desert Iron Brotherhood standing as civilian witnesses, and she went into the damaged access point with a flashlight and a camera, and she stayed down there for 31 minutes. When she came back up, her face was the face of someone who has confirmed the thing they were told to expect and found it worse than the briefing suggested. The infrastructure was intact. The backhoe had damaged the hatch and disturbed the surrounding soil, but the cistern itself, the original 1954 reserve, 50,000 gallons of collected water, was undamaged, sealed, and showing current water levels at 83% capacity. The pipes connecting it to the municipal supply line were intact, functional, and marked with installation dates that Okafor's engineers confirmed were consistent with work done approximately 26 months ago. Not 1954 infrastructure. New pipe. New fittings. A modern connection between an old reserve and the town's own supply. Installed 2 years ago and operated since then by whoever had access to the manual valve located in the room beneath the access hatch. The room that matched, in every dimensional and structural detail, the cross-section drawing in a child's composition notebook. David Harper was taken into custody at 9 p.m. Not by the county sheriff, by state authorities, on charges that began with water theft and resource fraud and expanded, over the following 72 hours, into a federal filing when the scope of the municipal supply manipulation was fully documented. Carol Harper was taken separately, an hour later, after Okafor's team confirmed that the financial records subpoenaed from the household showed payments to the private contractor who had installed the municipal connection, payments authorized through a joint account, co-signed. The county attorney filed to have the restraining order vacated at 10:30 p.m., 8 hours after it was issued, once it became structurally inconvenient to maintain. The motion cited changed circumstances. Ryder was sitting in the library when Evelyn told him. He read the vacatur notice on her phone and set it on the table and looked at his hands. "That's it," Evelyn said. "No," he said. "That's the beginning of it." He was right, and he knew he was right, and he wasn't saying it to be correct. He was saying it because Mia was sitting 3 feet away, and she needed to hear it from someone who meant it. The legal process was going to be long and procedurally difficult, and Harper's attorney was going to work every angle available, and the county system had enough of Harper's fingerprints on it that the cleanup would take months. The fabricated school record would need to be formally expunged. The distribution records would need to be audited. The families who had been held below the complaint threshold, Evelyn's list, the names against his chest all day, would need to be interviewed and their testimonies entered into a record that was now, finally, a state record rather than a county one. None of that was over tonight. But the cistern was documented. The infrastructure was photographed. The financial connection was in the subpoenaed records. And a 10-year-old girl's notebook, with its dated entries and cross-section drawing and 2 years of carefully recorded evidence, had been formally received into the state authorities' case file at 8:47 p.m. under Okafor's case number, which meant it existed now in a system that David Harper could not reach. The thing Mia had kept safe by never putting everything in one place was now in the place where it needed to be. They ate at the diner on the main drag at 11 p.m. because Evelyn said they were going to eat something, and she said it in the tone that did not invite discussion. It was Ryder and Hatch and Evelyn and Mia at a corner booth with red vinyl seats and a laminated menu and the particular late-night diner light that makes everything look like it's been there forever. Mia ordered pancakes. She ate them slowly, deliberately, the way she did everything, aware of each mouthful, present for it. She had her notebook beside her plate, and she wasn't drawing in it, but her hand rested on the cover the way it always did. The habitual contact of someone maintaining connection with the thing that had kept them intact. Hatch drank 3 coffees and said almost nothing, which was how Hatch processed things that mattered. Evelyn ate soup and watched the room with the long, patient attention of someone who had spent 50 years watching rooms. Ryder drank coffee and looked at the table and thought about Danny. He thought about Danny in the way he rarely let himself think about Danny. Not the hospital, not the phone call, not the silence, but earlier. Before. Danny at 20, on the back of Ryder's first bike. The two of them on a highway somewhere in the summer they'd had before everything got complicated. Danny, with his face into the wind and his arms out from Ryder's sides like he was daring gravity, laughing at something Ryder had said that he couldn't remember now. He thought about the laugh. He hadn't thought about the laugh in a long time. He had been so careful, for 15 years, to keep his memory of Danny confined to the manageable, the facts of it, the timeline, the sequence of events that could be laid out in order and assigned responsibility and filed somewhere that didn't require him to feel the weight of what had actually been lost. The laugh was not manageable. The laugh was the thing underneath the thing, the actual Danny, the person, rather than the loss. He let himself think about it tonight. He didn't know exactly why tonight was different from the previous 5,047 nights. Maybe because the particular kind of tired he was right now had gotten past the guard he usually kept. Maybe because sitting across from a 10-year-old girl who had spent 2 years keeping herself intact in a locked room had rearranged something in the way he was holding the past. Maybe because some things were only possible after you had stopped moving long enough for them to catch up. "Ryder," Mia said. He looked up. She was looking at him with the gray eyes that saw everything. She had her fork in her hand and a piece of pancake on it, and she was looking at him with the particular expression she used when she was about to say something that she had thought through carefully. "What was his name?" she said. "Your brother." He looked at her. "Danny," he said. She nodded, ate the bite of pancake. "Tell me something about him that isn't sad." He looked at her for a long moment. Hatch looked at his coffee. Evelyn looked at the room. "He could fix any engine," Ryder said slowly. "Didn't matter what was wrong with it. Didn't matter if he'd never seen the model before. He'd just look at it for a while, and then he'd know." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. He said machines were honest. They only broke for real reasons. Mia was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like something a good person would think," she said. It was not a consolation. It was not a comfort, exactly. It was a thing she said the way she said everything, because it was true. And truth was the currency she had survived on, and she offered it across the diner table like something she meant. He accepted it. The months that followed were not easy, which was honest, which was how real things went. The legal process ran long. Harper's attorney was good, and the county system took time to clean, and some of the families on Evelyn's list were reluctant at first, afraid of being wrong, afraid of retaliation, afraid of the specific vulnerability that came with saying out loud that you had been deceived by someone you trusted. Ryder and Hatch and the others drove to each name on that list, one by one, and they sat in kitchens and on porches and in driveways, and they listened before they talked, because that was the order that mattered. The ironbound house became something different, not because anyone planned it exactly. Plans had never been the Desert Iron Brotherhood's strongest mode, but because Hatch had an idea, and Domingo had tools, and Teo had a cousin with construction experience, and Ryder had found, somewhere in the machinery of the last several months, the thing he had been driving away from for 15 years, a reason to stop moving and build something instead. They rebuilt the shelter through the fall, extended it, added 2 cooling stations, a water supply system that Okafor's engineers consulted on, and the Brotherhood installed themselves, a small supply cache for families in crisis, and a corner room with a plywood desk and good light that no one officially designated for anything but that everyone understood was for Evelyn when she needed a place to work outside the library. The town's response to the Desert Iron Brotherhood changed slowly, and then all at once, the way certain changes worked, invisibly for a long time and then suddenly visible everywhere. The water distribution line that had run down Caldera's main drag all summer was gone by October, replaced by restored municipal supply running at full capacity from the unlocked cistern, now under state management and operating transparently. People in Caldera knew who had been in the yard with the phones. People in Caldera knew who had stood as witnesses at the edge of the legal radius and who had walked across it anyway. They did not stop seeing the leather and the tattoos, but they started seeing what was behind them. Mia went into a licensed foster placement in November, a woman named Ruth, in a town 40 minutes north, who had a vegetable garden and 2 cats and a spare room with a window that looked out at open country. It was not permanent, not yet. The permanence was still in process. But it was safe, and it was chosen carefully, and Evelyn had been part of the choosing. The day Mia left for Ruth's, she stood in the parking lot of the rebuilt ironbound house and looked at Ryder with the gray eyes and the notebook under her arm, and she said, "You're not going to disappear." It was not a question. "No," he said. "You promise." He thought about the promises he had made in his life and the ones he had kept and the particular weight of this specific one, what it required, what it meant to be held to it by someone who had every reason to expect promises to break. "Yeah," he said, "I promise." She looked at him for one more moment. Then she put her arms around his waist the way she had on the back of the Road King on Highway 9, the careful grip of someone holding what they needed to hold, and he put his hand on the back of her head the way you do with someone small and important, and he stood very still. She let go first. She got in Ruth's car, and the car pulled out of the parking lot, and she turned and looked out the back window until the road curved, and she was gone. The drawing appeared on the wall of the ironbound house in the spring. Someone, Mia, on a visit, while Ryder was outside, had taped it to the concrete block wall in the main room, at eye level, framed with a piece of cardboard that had been cut carefully and decorated around the edges in a border of small, precise geometric shapes. It was the cross-section drawing, the house with the tunnels beneath it, the tanks, the pipes, the access hatch. But she had added to it, extended it on a second piece of paper taped alongside. In the extension, above the house, she had drawn the highway, mile marker 47, and on the highway, a motorcycle. And beside the motorcycle, a figure, large, approximate, the body language of someone stopped rather than passing. Beneath the whole thing, in the same careful, deliberate letters as the notebook cover, she had written, "Sometimes the only thing between the truth and the dark is somebody who stopped." Ryder stood in front of it for a long time. Hatch came to stand beside him and looked at it and said nothing, which was the right thing. Outside, the desert was doing what the desert always did in spring, reconstituting itself after winter with the particular stubborn insistence of things that have survived enough seasons to know that survival is not the same as comfort, but is its own kind of sufficiency. The ironwood was coming in along the ridge. The temperature was 72 degrees, and the sky was the specific blue that Mia had described seeing for the first time from the ground beside mile marker 47, looking up. Ryder thought about that. About the sky through glass versus the sky directly overhead. About what it cost a person to spend years seeing the world through barriers and what it meant to finally lie down in the open and look up and have the blue be actual and unmediated and simply there. He thought about the Road King outside and the highway that connected the ironbound house to everywhere else, and the fact that he had not been more than 2 hours' ride from Caldera in 9 months, which was the longest he had been tethered to a geography since he was 19 years old and had not yet understood that distance was a coping strategy rather than a life. He thought about Danny fixing engines, looking at them until he understood. Machines only broke for real reasons. Hatch said, eventually, "You're staying." It wasn't a question either. "Yeah," Ryder said. He said it the way you said things that had been true for a while before you found the words. Not like a decision, but like a confirmation. Like the thing had already been settled somewhere in the process of becoming, and naming it now was simply the last step of a journey that the rest of him had already completed. Outside, a vehicle turned into the dirt track off the highway. Not a bike. Ruth's station wagon, the one with the dent in the rear panel that Ruth had explained was from a parking lot in 2019 and had never gotten around to fixing. It came up the track slowly and stopped under the overhang, and the door opened. Mia got out. She had her notebook under her arm and a second composition book tucked beside it. New, pristine, not yet opened. And she looked at the rebuilt shelter with the assessing, calibrating attention she brought to every space, running the inventory, measuring the safety of it. Then she looked at Ryder. He raised one hand, small gesture, the same one she had given him outside the library, the acknowledgement between people who had been in the desert together. She crossed the parking lot and came to stand beside him and looked at the drawing on the wall, her own work, returned to her from a different angle, and she looked at it for a long time. "I was going to draw a new one," she said, "but I think this one already says what it needs to say." "Yeah," he said, "I think so too." She opened the new notebook to the first page. Blank. She looked at it the way you looked at something that was entirely possibility and entirely responsibility at the same time. Then she started to draw. And outside, the desert held its long, patient breath, and the sky was exactly as blue as it had always been. And the Road King sat under the overhang with its engine cooling in the spring air, going nowhere for now, which was not the same as going nowhere forever, and was in fact, for the first time in a very long time,